open the east stand when it was built at about 2 weeks' notice because they'd been let down. I can't remember who by. And as it happened, the horse was lame, so I wasn't competing at the weekend.
Wow.
So I went. And about a month later, they wrote and asked me if I'd like to become patron.
Inside Balmoral Castle, a secret was about to shake the monarchy. Princess Anne stood up. What she said next made Prince William freeze, then blink hard to hold back the tears. It wasn't just a family meeting. It was the king's final wish. A wish that stunned Catherine, rattled Camilla, and left royal advisors speechless. No one saw it coming, because what Princess Anne revealed didn't just shift power. It threatened the very future of the crown. But what exactly was this wish, and why did it threaten to upend centuries of royal tradition? Before she passed, Queen Elizabeth whispered a secret only a few dared to repeat until now. And when Catherine stood before the royal family, her voice steady but her hands trembling, she wasn't just sharing a memory, she was detonating a royal time bomb. In that silent room at Balmoral, surrounded by portraits of monarchs long gone, she revealed the Queen's final wish. Not a blessing for tradition, not a farewell to the past, but a radical vision for the future. Queen Elizabeth had declared privately, personally, and with undeniable clarity that Catherine should not merely serve beside a king, but should one day be the monarch in her own right. The room didn't breathe. The idea was unthinkable. For centuries, the crown had always followed one unbroken line passing from king to son, from father to heir. And in those rare exceptions when a woman ruled, it was only because no male successor could be found. But this was different. Catherine wasn't being positioned to support the throne. She was being chosen to inherit it. Not as queen consort, a ceremonial partner, but as queen regnant, an active sovereign ruler. It was a seismic break from everything the monarchy stood for. The crown wasn't just shifting heads, it was changing hands, power, and purpose. Camilla sat frozen. For years, she had clawed her way toward acceptance, weathered scandals, rebuilt her image, stood beside Charles, in silence and loyalty. And now, with a single sentence from a queen who was no longer alive to defend it, Camilla's hard-won legacy was unraveling. Elizabeth's final wish didn't simply elevate Catherine, it erased Camilla's permanence. It cast her not as a destination, but a transition, a placeholder, a quiet whisper in a much louder story. And no one in that room missed the message, especially not Camilla. Her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on nothing. William's gaze shifted from his wife to the shocked faces around the table, then back to Catherine. Had she known all along? Had this truth been sitting inside her, quietly waiting for the right time to explode? He couldn't read her face. But in that moment, the weight of the crown, the press of legacy, and the ghost of his grandmother's expectations all crashed into him at once. His silence spoke louder than words, and the pressure hanging over him now wasn't just about his future, it was about hers, and whether he could live in the shadow of a woman meant to stand on her own. Princess Anne, ever the realist, was already thinking 10 steps ahead. She raised immediate concerns. The monarchy was a legal structure, not just a family. Could a queen's personal wish override centuries of precedent? What would Parliament say? What would the Commonwealth accept? Constitutional experts would have to be consulted. Laws reviewed, public perception managed. Because if this path was to be followed, it wasn't just a change of titles, it was a rewriting of the monarchy's blueprint. And yet, as the family sat stunned, it was already too late to pretend the truth hadn't been spoken. Queen Elizabeth's final words had been heard, and now they echoed louder than ever. But if Catherine is to reign as queen, what does this mean for Charles and Camilla? Camilla worked for decades to gain acceptance. But Queen Elizabeth's words shattered it all in an instant. For years, Camilla had stood in the shadows, never fully embraced, always quietly questioned. She had walked a tightrope of grace and restraint, rebuilding her image brick by brick after years of scandal. With time, patience, and King Charles's unwavering support, she finally emerged from the storm. The title of Queen Consort was not just ceremonial, it was a symbol that she had made it, that she belonged, that the public, the press, and the palace had all moved on. But now, that fragile sense of legitimacy was slipping through her fingers. Queen Elizabeth's private wish didn't just elevate Catherine, it pulled the rug from under Camilla's entire legacy, a legacy that had taken a lifetime to assemble. The moment the words left Catherine's lips, Camilla's world began to blur. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. But behind her stillness was a storm. Everyone in the room knew what this meant. Camilla wasn't just being bypassed, she was being erased. Her place, once so carefully secured, now felt like borrowed space. The Queen's final wish didn't acknowledge Camilla's contributions, her struggle, or her transformation. It confirmed what many had whispered for years, that she was never meant to be the future, just a temporary figure holding place for the real Queen to come. And with that realization came the return of an old ghost. Diana. The Diana shadow that Camilla had spent decades trying to outrun came roaring back. The press didn't wait long. Headlines reawakened the past. Articles began questioning whether Camilla was ever truly accepted or merely tolerated. Old footage resurfaced. Speculations reignited. The fragile peace she had brokered with the public began to crack. And while Catherine said nothing publicly, the tension between them behind palace doors became undeniable. What once was a quiet alliance now simmered with unspoken resentment. The younger royal admired, elegant, untouchable, now stood on the brink of the very throne Camilla believed she had finally reached. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Within palace walls, loyalties grew complicated. Advisors who once flanked Camilla now watched closely, recalculating futures. Whispers floated through corridors. Some wondered aloud whether Camilla should quietly step back to preserve the monarchy's unity. Others questioned if she would fight to defend her place. But Camilla remained silent. She had spent too long being underestimated to make a move in haste. Yet even silence can scream when the world is watching. And this time, the world wasn't just watching, it was judging. Her every glance, every absence, every public smile was now dissected for meaning. As days passed, the balance of power continued to shift. Camilla still wore the crown, but it no longer fit quite the same. Something had cracked, and everyone could see it. Because in the shadows of Balmoral, it wasn't just the king's health that was failing. The monarchy itself was beginning to tilt. And as Camilla's crown begins to wobble, King Charles faces an even deeper crisis. Behind the palace walls, a far greater battle was unfolding inside the king's body. In early 2024, whispers turned into worried glances as King Charles was quietly diagnosed with cancer. At first, the news was sealed behind polished palace doors, released only in carefully crafted statements that said everything and nothing at all. The king has cancer, they admitted, but they offered no details, no type, no stage, no prognosis, just a few hopeful words. But those closest to the throne knew better. They watched as the once vigorous monarch grew pale, thinner, and slower with each passing week. Behind his soft smiles and royal wave, something was slipping away, and the race to protect the crown had already begun. The signs were everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Events suddenly canceled. Appearances postponed with vague references to doctor's advice. Official schedules trimmed down until they were nearly unrecognizable. The red boxes, the king's daily flood of government. Documents arrived less frequently. He no longer read late into the night. And when he did attend public events, aides noticed how tightly he clung to Camilla's arm. His steps were slower, his voice quieter. There were mornings when he barely emerged from his chambers. Palace staff quickly learned to read the subtle signals. A specific tie meant he was feeling strong. A sudden menu change hinted at fatigue. The absence of his longtime valet meant something was wrong. The monarchy didn't speak about it, but every hallway echoed the same fear. Time was running out. And in the center of that storm stood Queen Camilla. No longer just a controversial partner or ceremonial figure, she became his anchor. The woman, once labeled an outsider, now managed the fragile emotional core of the crown. She shielded Charles from unnecessary stress, intercepted phone calls, and managed his moods with quiet precision. While doctors monitored his blood and his breath, Camilla monitored his spirit. The burden aged her too, but she never let it show. She knew what was at stake, not just Charles's health, but the final act of a reign still searching for purpose. And behind the palace gates, she began to wonder if the king would live long enough to deliver his mother's final command. Because that wish, Queen Elizabeth's hidden message about Catherine, still hung in the air unfulfilled. The king had not yet acted. No formal announcement had been made. No plan put in place. Every day that passed, the pressure mounted. Would he crown his daughter-in-law before the cancer crowned him? Or would his silence become his greatest regret? The palace couldn't delay forever. The king's struggle wasn't just a private one anymore, it had become a constitutional crisis, hiding in plain sight. And while the public carried on, unaware of the urgency behind those royal smiles, the inner circle understood what was truly happening. With Charles growing weaker, a power shift begins to take shape, one that no one is fully prepared for. While Charles weakened, William stepped into the spotlight, but not by choice. It began quietly, almost invisibly. A few more meetings, a sudden appearance here, a last-minute speech there. But behind the scenes, something far greater was unfolding. The prince was no longer just filling in, he was being prepared. The weight of the monarchy, once a distant concept shadowing his future, now landed squarely on his shoulders. Government officials started turning to him for decisions. Military leaders briefed him directly. Staff began referring to him in ways they hadn't before, not as the heir, but as the figure already taking charge. And William, who had always walked the tightrope between duty and privacy, was now forced to cross it entirely. Every day, the transformation deepened, but it didn't happen overnight. It was carved out of decades of quiet molding. William had grown up in the glare of cameras, but trained in silence. His time at Eton, his service as a search and rescue pilot, and his years of public engagements had forged more than a public image, they had shaped a leader. A man built to withstand pressure, but never immune to pain. And now, with his father's health failing, that inner steel was being tested. The red boxes of state matters were landing on his desk. His presence at military events no longer symbolic, it was expected. His name, once paired with future tense phrases, had shifted to the language of now. But with every crown-shaped responsibility came something no training could prepare him for: grief. Not the loud kind that crashes into you, but the quiet one that bleeds into everything. Watching his father fade, knowing what lay ahead, William carried on. He didn't speak of it, he didn't show it, but those close to him saw the signs: longer hours, distant glances, the rare flicker of doubt. He stood for the cameras and smiled for the crowds, but inside, he was a son coming to terms with the end of an era. And all the while, he had to keep the machinery of the monarchy moving. Because the institution waits for no man, not even a grieving prince. Yet something remarkable began to happen. The public, long divided in its view of the royal family, started to see William differently. Not as Diana's son, not as Charles's heir, but as his own force. Calm, measured, principled. He wasn't chasing approval, he was commanding respect. His advocacy for mental health, his focus on homelessness, his grounded approach to global issues all began to resonate more deeply. People weren't just watching a royal rise, they were watching a future king form in real time. Inside the palace, whispers shifted. Advisors who once briefed Charles began consulting William more directly. Crisis response plans now had his fingerprints, and though no official change had been declared, everyone could feel it. A silent shift, a quiet succession. William wasn't just standing in for the king, he was becoming the king in waiting far sooner than anyone had anticipated. But as William rises, the monarchy faces another battle from within its own family. Two queens, one crown, and only one can lead the future. As the dust settled from Queen Elizabeth's stunning final wish, a new conflict began to rise, quiet at first, but unmistakable. Catherine and Camilla. Two women, two legacies, and one throne hanging between them. Inside the palace, the divide was sharp. On one side stood Camilla, the queen who had finally claimed her place beside Charles after years of scrutiny and scandal. She was the embodiment of tradition, flawed, steady, tested by time. On the other stood Catherine, beloved by the people, untouched by controversy, and now anointed by a queen who saw in her something more, something enduring, something powerful, the image of the monarchy's future. The palace had never been more conflicted. Among royal aides, whispers turned into strategic alignments. Some believed in Camilla's quiet resilience, her ability to steady Charles during his illness, and to hold the institution together while the king faded. But others, often younger, more reform-minded staff, saw Catherine as the monarchy's evolution, a woman who could modernize the crown without breaking it. Her youth, her poise, her public adoration, it all painted a portrait of a monarchy reborn. A monarchy that could survive the backlash of the past by pivoting toward a new face, a new symbol, and a new reign. But nothing about this battle was public. Not yet. The war between Catherine and Camilla wasn't fought with words. It was felt in silent rooms, tense glances, and subtle moves. Leaked headlines began to hint at tension. Royal watchers noted their absences at one another's events. Advisors grew cautious, carefully weighing every statement, every appearance, every press release. The Queen's wish, once meant as a guiding light, now cast long, divisive shadows across every decision. And at the center of it all, King Charles, frail, fighting illness, and now pulled between his wife and the memory of his mother. He had stood by Camilla through every storm, but his mother's voice, echoing from the past, demanded a different path, a different queen, a different ending. He didn't speak about it, but the weight of it pressed into every breath he took. Every delay in addressing the Queen's wish only deepened the crisis. Because silence wasn't neutral, it was choosing one side by default. As the internal divisions hardened, the palace's foundations began to shake. Catherine wasn't pushing, but she didn't have to. Camilla wasn't backing down, but she couldn't undo what had been revealed. And while the royal family tried to pretend all was well, the truth was spreading fast. Two queens, one throne, and no clear answer. As internal divisions grow, outside forces begin circling. Across the Atlantic, two former royals watch as the monarchy reshapes and wonder how it will affect their children. In Montecito, California, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle aren't just spectators, they are deeply invested observers, navigating the fallout of a monarchy they walked away from, but never fully escaped. The Queen's final wish and the emerging divide between Camilla and Catherine aren't distant royal squabbles to them. They're potential turning points that could either close the door on their children's future or suddenly pull them back into a system they tried so hard to leave behind. For Harry, the echoes of his past are impossible to ignore. And for Meghan, the cost of re-entering that world for her family, for her peace, feels more dangerous than ever. But the question hangs heavy. Where do Archie and Lilibet now stand in this volatile hierarchy? With the line of succession uncertain and public roles being redefined in real time, the titles, influence, and future responsibilities of Harry's children are no longer clear. Will they be recognized if Catherine ascends as monarch? Will they be welcomed if the monarchy bends toward a new modern face? Or will they be quietly written out of the future, their birthright once promised? The silence from Buckingham Palace only deepens the unease, because every move made in London now ripples far beyond its walls, across oceans, into headlines, into family dinners, into court filings, and into childhoods growing up far from the throne. And it's not just Harry and Meghan who are affected. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, once considered secondary royals, are now watching their places fade into obscurity. Lady Louise Windsor, rarely a subject of royal debate, suddenly finds her quiet life pulled into the spotlight. Catherine's find or rise as a potential monarch reshuffles everything. It shifts power, relevance, and future duties. The family tree may remain the same, but the hierarchy is being rewritten. Meanwhile, outside the family, the world is watching closely. In Commonwealth countries across the globe, from Canada to Australia to Jamaica, the growing instability inside Buckingham Palace is reigniting a long-standing question. Should they continue to recognize the British monarch as their head of state? For years, nations have quietly debated it. Now, with Charles's illness, Camilla's uncertain standing, and the monarchy's future hanging in the balance, those debates are turning loud. Barbados has already made its move. Others may not, be far behind. Back in the UK, the public isn't silent either. Across social media, in newspapers, and in quiet conversations, people are questioning the relevance of the crown. They see a monarchy at war with itself, scrambling to modernize without losing its soul. And as Catherine and Camilla become symbols of two opposing visions, the world is forced to ask, is this an evolution or a collapse? Because for every ripple created by the Queen's final wish, a wave of reckoning follows. Meanwhile, inside Britain, the palace braces for an uncertain future. For the first time in decades, the future of the crown hangs in the balance, not from enemies, but from within. The British monarchy, once seen as unshakable, is now teetering on the edge of uncertainty. Charles's health grows more fragile with each passing day. The public watches with unease. Behind palace doors, the succession crisis deepens. Not because there is no heir, but because no one can agree on what that heir should represent. The divide is no longer just about who will wear the crown. It's about what the crown means in an age where tradition clashes violently with modernity. Expectation. The royal family is no longer merely a symbol, it's a battlefield of legacy, loyalty, and quiet rebellion. Within the inner sanctum of the monarchy, advisors scramble to chart a path forward. On one side, there are those who believe stability is everything, that the monarchy must preserve its traditions, maintain order, and guard its public image at all costs. They argue that any disruption, any deviation from the plan, is a threat to the institution's survival. On the other side are those who see the writing on the wall. They believe that resisting change is the greater danger. That Catherine, with her modern presence and unshakable popularity, is the only hope of salvaging relevance in a world moving faster than the crown can keep up. These tensions don't play out on camera, but behind the scenes, they are brutal. At the center of it all stands Sir Clive Alderton, King Charles's principal private secretary, a man known for his precision, his discretion, and his unmatched loyalty to the crown. In recent months, Alderton has become the monarchy's quiet architect. He's held meetings that don't appear on schedules. He's drawn contingency plans that include outcomes never publicly discussed. He knows that Charles's reign may not last long enough to see through a peaceful transition. And so, preparations are underway, plans for a sudden abdication, or even an unprecedented power-sharing arrangement that would hand major duties to William while Charles remains king in name only. Nothing is ruled out. Everything is on the table. Meanwhile, strategy sessions grow longer. Palace insiders no longer speak in hypotheticals. They speak in timelines. Media advisors workshop announcements that may never be used, while legal teams examine the constitutional consequences of fulfilling Queen Elizabeth's final wish. Every decision is a gamble. Every delay adds pressure. And though the public sees carefully curated smiles and handshakes, the real monarchy is bracing for impact. Because it isn't just one throne at stake, it's the future of an institution built on the illusion of certainty. And illusions don't last forever. The monarchy stands at a crossroads. One path leads to preservation, the other to reinvention. But both are paved with risk. And just as the tension reached its peak, as silence thickened across the halls of Balmoral, Princess Anne stood once more. But this time, she didn't speak her mother's words. She spoke her brother's. The final shock came when Princess Anne stood again, this time with her brother's own final words. With a trembling voice, Princess Anne read King Charles's last written command, and it wasn't what anyone expected. The room, heavy with centuries of tradition, fell into silence as she opened the sealed envelope. No one breathed. Not William, not Catherine, not even Camilla. The letter, written by the king himself after his diagnosis, carried more than just words. It carried a seismic shift in the future of the crown. In it, Charles spoke not as a monarch protecting legacy, but as a father, a son, and a man staring down the end. And in those carefully chosen lines, he revealed his final wish, that Catherine should become the future of the monarchy, not merely beside William, but in her own right. A sovereign queen. Gasps rippled through the family. For a royal line built on male succession and titles forged in stone, this was unthinkable. But Charles left no room for doubt. He wrote of his deep belief in Queen Elizabeth's vision, of his admiration for Catherine's quiet strength, her grace under pressure, and her ability to connect with people across generations. He acknowledged that the world was changing faster than the monarchy could follow, and that only someone like Catherine could lead it through. The words were bold, emotional, final, a call for unity, a plea to respect not just his voice, but the voice of the Queen who had guided Britain for over 70 years. William didn't speak. He couldn't. His face crumbled as his mother's legacy and his father's last request collided in front of him. The tears he had held back for so long now fell freely. It wasn't just the weight of the crown, it was the weight of his family's entire history, crashing down on him at once. Across from him, Catherine sat, frozen, shocked, moved, broken open. This wasn't power she had asked for. It was a burden, laid at her feet by those who believed she was the only one who could carry it forward. And then, without a word, Camilla stood and walked out. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. Her silence spoke louder than any protest. Years of struggle, of earning her place, of weathering scandal and public scorn. All of it suddenly erased by one final decision. The Queen Consort reduced to a footnote in a story that had just been rewritten. The moment was raw, unforgettable, and irreversible. The monarchy now stands at the edge of transformation. The old guard has spoken its last words. A new vision has emerged from the shadows, and as Catherine's eyes locked with William's across the room, it became clear nothing would ever be the same again. What happens next will define the crown for generations. Will tradition win, or will the king's final wish rewrite history? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we will see you in the next one.